In this video, we are going to talk about the circulatory system, and I want to talk first a little bit about a doctor named William Harvey, who in the 1600s was trying to determine blood flow through the body. So he lived in a time when we didn't have microscopes, we didn't have the same types of medical technology that we have now. So he was doing experiments where he was tying tourniquets on people to try and see how it affected the blood flow in the body. And he found out quite a bit about how the blood flows, and he gave quite a bit of light into how the body actually works, and it's still what we believe now. So William Harvey actually explained circulation as we now know it. In the diagram that I have drawn here, I actually have used like a dark purple color. Often in diagrams you see deoxygenated blood as blue, but then a lot of people start to think that the blood in your body is actually blue when it's deoxygenated, when it's really actually more of a dark red color. So just to make it a little bit more clear, I've used this darker purple, kind of dark red. So William Harvey in his experiments actually realized that, or he theorized that we have veins that actually carry the blood back to the heart, and arteries carry blood away from the heart. So we have them in two different circuits in the body. We have what we call the pulmonary circuit, okay, which will be when the blood is going to and from the lungs, and we have the systemic circuit when the blood is going from the heart to the body and back again. And we need to remember that the purpose of the circulatory system is to actually carry nutrients to the cells, to take any waste that was created in the cells away from the cells. It also, at the same time, will carry things like hormones and immune cells through the body. And it also carries oxygen to the cells to help with cellular respiration, and it'll carry the carbon dioxide back from the cells to the lungs to get rid of it. So looking at the blood vessels in the body, we said there were arteries and veins, and then we also have capillaries. Some people pronounce it capillary. So I'm just going to talk about how each of them is made up. So in both arteries and veins, again, we see this word lumen that we saw when we learned about the digestive system. So that again is the inside, the tube part. Then we also have what we call the three different layers. So the tunica externa, the tunica media, and the tunica intima. So I always remember that the externa is on the outside, so it's external, media is in the middle, and intima is on the inside. So you can see that the width of them are different between the different blood vessels. So again, arteries are going away from the heart. So they are going to have more blood pressure at that point. So they have a lot of muscle and elastic tissue to be able to help with the stretching and recoiling that they have to have as the blood moves through them. And there are lots of different named arteries in the body. So we have the coronary arteries that would supply blood to the heart, the hepatic artery that supplies blood or takes blood to the liver, and the renal artery that takes blood to the kidneys. And then sometimes we'll see the word arterioles, which are basically as the arteries get smaller and smaller as they're going towards the capillaries and back to the veins. So just thinking about the different layers. So the tunica externa is like a very strong outer layer of connective tissue, and it also has that elastin fiber to allow for the elasticity. And there's also some more of the elastic fibers in the tunica media, again, that middle layer, and smooth muscle there. And then on the inside, that tunica intima is a very smooth inner layer of endothelial cells. And those are in direct contact with the blood. And in comparison, the lumen, we can see here, is narrower than it is in the vein. So as we said before, the blood pressure in the arteries is quite strong in comparison to the veins. Again, they have to be able to stretch and recoil like an elastic band. And then also there are muscles along the arteries that actually help to contract to narrow the lumen, which helps maintain the blood pressure. So in our normal vein here, we can actually see that the lumen is fairly wide in comparison to this one in the middle. So when we have the need to slow the blood flow to a part of the body, then it actually will have what we call vasoconstriction, and that means that it will actually narrow that lumen in the blood vessels. And then we can also have times where we might want to actually increase the blood flow to a part of the body, so the muscles will relax and we actually can see that we widen the lumen, and that's called vasodilation. So I'm going to skip over the veins for a second and talk about the capillaries. So these are that connection between the arteries and the veins. So again, the arteries were going away from the heart. Now we're in the body, maybe in the small intestine, in our limbs, anywhere. We have these tiny little blood vessels called capillaries. So they're really, really thin. They're only one cell layer thick. And that's so that we can have the smallest distance possible for diffusion to happen. So if we were talking about the small intestine when we did digestion, we talked about how we had to absorb the nutrients from the lumen of the small intestine into the blood vessels so that they can go to the body. So if we wanted to get glucose to the cells to do cellular respiration, we need to have that very thin membrane in the capillary to be able to allow the nutrients or the oxygen or whatever it happens to be able to easily diffuse from wherever it happens to be, whether it's in the small intestine or in the blood vessel itself, back into the cells where it needs to go to do whatever it needs to do. Something else that's interesting is that we have capillaries everywhere. So they are never more than 2 cells away from wherever a cell is. So a cell will never be more than 2 cells away from a capillary. Okay, now we'll talk about the veins. We'll go back to them. So veins, again, are carrying blood back to the heart. So they will be less elastic and have a larger lumen in the middle again, because they're not going to have that same blood pressure. So also related to that, because they don't have that same blood pressure and we're trying to get back to the heart, sometimes climbing against gravity, we actually have in our veins these valves that are one way, and they're actually preventing the blood flow from going backwards. So we actually want the blood flow to go this way. So once the blood is through, it'll close so that the blood flow can't go back the other way. We don't want that to happen. At the same time, with those one-way valves, the other thing that's happening is your skeletal muscles are actually contracting to help the blood flow back. And it's very important that we don't allow that deoxygenated blood to flow backwards. We want it to go back to the heart so that it can get some more oxygen. And the next thing I wanted to go over was how to properly label the heart. So one thing you need to keep in mind is that when you have the heart on a paper like this, it's actually drawn backwards to how it is in your body. So your right and your left often get mixed up. So this is actually the left side of the heart, and this is the right side of the heart. So if I'm actually using a paper, I would actually hold it up to myself to get my rights and left straight. So we have 4 chambers in the heart, so we'll label them first. So at the top we have 2 chambers that are called atria, or one atrium. So again, this is the right side. So this is the right atrium. Okay, and then on the other side we have the left atrium. Okay, the chambers at the bottom of the heart are called ventricles. So here is the left ventricle. And we're missing the line over here, so I'll draw one. And the right ventricle. Something else I haven't drawn my line. We actually have here what we call the superior vena cava and the inferior vena cava. Okay, and they're both veins again, so vena cava is a type of vein. So they are coming to the heart, and we'll talk about the blood flow after we finish label. So this one is actually, we're going to label the pulmonary. Pulmonary meaning related to the lungs, the pulmonary artery, because it's going to be flowing away from the heart. And then these are the pulmonary veins. So they will be coming back from the lungs to the heart. Along the middle of the heart, we actually have the septum, and a lot of people get confused and think of the septum in their nose, but this is actually the part that separates the right and left heart sides of the heart. And then we still need to label the valves. So between each of the atria and the ventricles, and then also again before the blood will leave the heart, there are different types of valves. So they have a lot of different names, and I'm not super concerned about the mitral valve versus the bicuspid and the tricuspid valve. I will give them names, but know that you'll often find them with different names. So the ones that are between the atria and ventricle are called atrioventricular valves. So we often just say for short form AV valve. This one happens to be the one that we call the mitral valve. And then on the other side, our other AV valve is here. And this one happens to be the tricuspid. If we were at school, I'd show you my beautiful heart model and show you that the valve actually is made up of 3 parts, and that's where the tricuspid part comes from. Our other types of valves are called semi-lunar. Oh, a little mistake there. I'll just erase that. Semi meaning half and lunar being moon. So that again, the shape of them looks like a half moon. And the other one is over here. And again, they have other names, but if you know that they're called semi-lunar valves, that works for me. Again, they are the ones that are actually right before the blood will actually leave the heart. Okay, and then I'm just going to draw similar to what we had on our first heart diagram when we were talking about the pulmonary and systemic circuits, how the blood actually flows. I'm going to just use blue, even though it hurts me, just to show you the deoxygenated blood. So it's coming into the heart, okay, and this is actually coming up behind here, into that right atrium. It's coming from the body, so it's been used up of the oxygen. It still has oxygen in it, it just doesn't have the optimal amount that we would need for that concentration gradient for diffusion. So it'll come into that right atrium, and then it'll go through the AV valve into the ventricle, and then it will leave, go to the lungs through the pulmonary arteries. Okay, so you notice that they branch to the right and the left. When they are coming back from the lungs, now oxygenated, so I'll show it with red, they're coming back through those pulmonary veins, okay, into the left atrium. They will again go through an AV valve into the ventricle, and then they're going to leave up through here, and they're leaving through the aorta, which I forgot to label, so let's put a label on that one. This is the aorta here, which is another artery. It's actually the biggest artery that has the thickest walls. Again, if we were able to do the pig dissection this year, you'd be able to actually see how much difference there is between the aorta and something like one of the veins, and how different the walls are. That muscle to be able to withstand the pressure. So again, that aorta is the largest artery in your body, and it will take blood to the different parts of your body. You also need to understand how heart rate is actually regulated. So you actually have in your brain, in your medulla oblongata, a bundle of nerves that helps to detect different changes in levels of carbon dioxide, pH, those types of things to help regulate the heart rate. So if it received a notice that your pH of your blood was changing and it was becoming more acidic, that would be because of a buildup likely of carbon dioxide. So at that point, it's going to send a message to your heart to speed up, because it wants to clear that clear the carbon dioxide from your blood and bring in more oxygen. So we have 2 different nerves that can have an effect. So we have the cardiac accelerator nerve, which, as it says in the name, actually helps to speed up the heart rate. And we also have the vagus nerve, which actually will slow down your heart rate. Then in the heart, those nerves are connected to the sinoatrial node or the SA node. That bundle of nerves is then going to send an electrical impulse to the atrioventricular node. Again, it's named that because it's on the wall between the atrium and the ventricle. And once that happens, then it's actually going to send a wave of muscular contractions through these Purkinje fibers, which I always say are my favorite biological word, which actually makes the heart contract. So again, when your body receives some type of signal and your brain determines that it needs to change your heart rate, it will send that signal to your heart to change it and change how fast it's pumping. And something else that you need to know is that it also involves some hormones. So most of us know adrenaline will help speed up your heart rate. So the proper scientific name for adrenaline is epinephrine. So that's the hormone that will be in the blood to help speed up the heart rate and allow for the fight or flight reflex. So preparing your body to run away from a bear or to fight in a fight, and those types of things. So that will help increase heart rate, as well as low blood pressure can cause an increase in heart rate. Again, that low oxygen concentration and the low pH. Things that would decrease your heart rate would be if you had high blood pressure, lots of oxygen in so a high oxygen concentration or high pH. The final thing that we want to talk about is something called atherosclerosis, which is a really long and hard to pronounce word. And it's basically the hardening and narrowing of your arteries. So what happens is, again, this is our normal artery on a regular day. Over time, you can actually have fatty deposits start to build up. When that happens, we actually have calcium and other minerals start to attach to it. And that will slowly over time make the vessel harder and less elastic. So we can see over time it's slowly starting to get more and more blocked. If we start to have a full blockage, that can cause a heart attack or a myocardial infarction. So we can actually treat, if possible, if it's not too late, with what's called angioplasty, or they can actually do coronary bypass surgery if the blockage is actually in one of the coronary arteries that supplies blood to the heart itself. They will actually try and bypass it. So they will change the blood flow so that it goes around the blockage. This would allow the blood to flow properly. Whenever you don't have proper blood flow, it will cause the tissue to die. Causes of atherosclerosis could be a large amount of low density lipoproteins, so LDL, in your blood. A chronic high blood glucose levels, so whether it's from obesity or diabetes. Chronic high blood pressure, which could come from stress or smoking. There's lots of information about trans fats and how they're bad for us, and they can also cause atherosclerosis. And also it can be caused by infection.